everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in this lovely early morning for this virtual event for Rain Taxi's 2021 Twin Cities Book Festival. I'm LindaStack-Nelson. I'm the managing editor for Rain Taxi and the exhibit coordinator for the Twin Cities Book Festival. And today I am also your moderator. Here at Rain Taxi, we're a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. And if you haven't heard about us before, for whatever reason, I invite you to check out our website afterwards. You can find out about the very cool print magazine that we put out with lots of good book reviews, author interviews, etc. And you are also able to find out about lots of other cool things we do, like the upcoming virtual events and live events that are going to be part of the Twin Cities Book Festival. Today's event, like most of ours, is free to attend, but if you're able to pitch in a little something, you can feel free to use the donate button, which is at the bottom of your screen. Some of the funding for our festival comes from the Minnesota Regional Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to legislative appropriations from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And as you can see, we also have some lovely ASL interpretation access, which is available today thanks to our friends at the University of Minnesota Libraries. But as I started to say, our most vital support actually comes from individual readers and donors like you. Whether you're a one-time donor or you'd like to become a member, you can stay in touch with us year-round that way. We are always, always, always grateful for any and all support. And don't forget, there are lots of other ways besides just enjoying our beautiful faces and voices that you can join in with the event today. There's the chat where you can share all your observations, comments, questions. And if you have a question for the authors that I will be talking to today, you can put that in the Q&A box, which is right at the bottom of your screen where it says ask a question. You can click that, submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of this delightful little talk. And most importantly of all, you can buy the books that we are going to talk about today. There's a little green button on your screen that will take you to the page where you can get all of these books. You can get them shipped. You can pick them up locally. Our local indie book selling partner is Red Balloon Bookshop, who are a wonderful little shop in the Twin Cities. And whether you're here or somewhere far away, you can get these beautiful books that we're going to talk about in your hands. Which we're sure you will after this very fun conversation we're going to have. So with all those lovely formalities out of the way, I'm so excited to welcome to the screen the folks that I am sharing it with today. So we have with us Dhonielle Clayton, who's going to be talking about The Mirror, Shattered Midnight, Bethany C. Morrow, who's going to be talking about So Many Beginnings, a Little Women remix, and Nafiza Azad, who's going to talk to us about The Wild Ones. Yay! So I'm so glad to have you all here today. This is kind of a dream panel for me. It's very exciting to get to see everybody and talk to you all. But I just want to start for basics for anybody who may not have read even the summaries of your books. I'd like to just start with a little bit about them so people get like a baseline for all of the chit-chatting we're going to do. So I'll start with you, Dhonielle. Do you want to say just a little bit about The Mirror, Shattered Midnight?
Sure. The Mirror series is a revolutionary 4-book series with 4 different authors writing in a shared universe, and I'm book number 2. The first book was Broken Wish by Julie C. Dow, and then my book is Shattered Midnight, and it traces a fairy tale curse through generations of a family. So we've left Germany in the 1800s, and now we are in New Orleans in 1928, and you get to meet Zora, who is a girl who has many secrets, who is sort of on the run, but I won't tell you why. And she wants to be a jazz musician. And she has to face all kinds of things. And her magic is tied to music and tied to, how she sings and what she creates. And of course, her magic is a little bit out of control. And so she's got to figure out how to reconcile her magic, what happened with her magic when she left New York City, and also how to hide in New Orleans and figure out how to break this curse.
That's a very good, you did a good job of like, here's all the little bits of it, but none of the stories of it.
It's my first time pitching the book, and I was like, wait, I wrote this. I was like, what is this about?
Well, I'm going to do my best too to not say anything that's a spoiler about any of your books, because they all have big and exciting changes fairly quickly. So we're all just going to do our best little tiptoe walk. through not ruining these books for people who will get to experience their surprises on their own. Sorry, you go ahead, Bethany. Tell us about yours.
So, oh gosh, I was about to say the wrong title. So Many Beginnings is this book. So Many Beginnings is a Little Women remix. And the most important thing to understand is that it is a remix and not a retelling. So I make no attempt to follow Louisa May Alcott's story. I make no attempt to keep the characters in those sort of restricted dimensions. And I am intentionally challenging the idea of universality in a canon that largely, if not entirely, is white European American.
Yes.
So Many Beginnings is about a March family in 1863 in North Carolina on the island of Roanoke, living at a freed people colony, which is the central location for most of the book and is a real place. So this is another in the grand Black American tradition of excavating real history and introducing it through a beloved property and challenging, therefore, the beloved property by bringing the historicity to it. So I really don't have to tell you much. You know that there are 4 sisters. You know there's a boy named Lori. You don't know anything else because you don't know these girls yet. So
That's true. There's a lot that you might think that you would know about the book that you would be surprised and excited to find out you were wrong about, I think. Okay, Nafiza, you're up.
So The Wild Ones is a novel about Paheli, who was sold to a rich man by her mother. She escapes a bit too late, but she does escape, and when fleeing, she bumps into a boy made of stars. He hands her a box full of stars, and these stars lead her to the Between, a magical corridor that runs across the world, throughout the world, with doors that lead to different cities in the world. So Paheli goes into the Between and becomes something more, something other. She pieces together her broken and bitter self and collects other girls like her, girls who have been betrayed by the people who they should have been able to trust most. Together, these girls are called the Wild Ones. The Wild Ones travel the cities of the world, saving other girls like them, and on their travels, they bump into Tarana, the boy who saved them, the boy made of stars. This time, he is the one who needs saving, so the girls band together, bring all the resources together, and save him. The book is inspired by, not a retelling of, but inspired by the Peter Pan and his Lost Boys. So, yeah.
Well, I am very impressed, Nafiza, by your ability because your book is so unique and imaginative and has such a otherworldly quality that I don't think I could ever have summarized it. So I'm very glad that I put only you in charge of it. Well, I want to start out with talking about the thing that I've sort of partially titled this panel about, which is about family, because all of these books are in a lot of ways about what family ties mean, how we create them, how they're passed on. And each of them has a very different way of spinning through that and discovering that. So I want to just start about talking about whether you went into these books with a concept of how you wanted to portray family or how you wanted the family to feel, or whether you more discovered it along the way. I'm just very curious to hear about how you each conceptualized the family dynamics and the family legacies that you created in these stories. So I'll just probably keep going in the same order so that we can carefully, or not so carefully, more comfortably streamline our way through. So Dhonielle, I'll start with you again.
Okay. So I knew mine was going to be about a family because it was set up that way. And you meet pieces of these 2 families in Julie C. Dow's book. And you get to see how the branches come together in the other books. And so my book was the convergence of the 2 families that you've met and their friction in my book. And so when I first started, I was actually, they were like, oh, we want Zora to be an orphan and not know her family and come into family. And I said, no. No. She will have a loving family that she was raised in, and she will have a complete family unit because we see too many stereotypes with Black families being broken. I'm like, nope, she comes from a wonderful family in Harlem, and she has to go down south because there was also this thing of it's the 1920s. She went from New York to New Orleans, which is Jim Crow South. And I was like, hello, Disney. Do you have any idea about how Black people, the history of Black people and migration and movement patterns through history? No, you don't. It's clear. Let me fix this for you. And so the only reason she would have gone down south is because of an incident, right? An unplanned pregnancy, which we weren't going to do, not, or some sort of incident, right? And so that's what we did. And she gets to go down to New Orleans and stay with her aunt and her cousins, which is another little family. So it's about her larger family, which she left in New York and who she misses dearly, plus her found family, or her, her cousins and her aunt, which is not, it doesn't always go well. And then the little family of jazz musicians and people she meets in New Orleans that she creates a little pocket. So I wanted to contrast all of these different families and make sure that my character was never without a family, because that was very important to me and intentional to have those contrasts.
Well, and I really think it ended up the memories of her family. I'm going to try so hard on this, but the memories of her family and the way that she relates to that history, I think really helped build her as a character, and her magic, especially, I think really was complicated and more interesting to me in terms of that.
Right, because she had a family and she could remember, oh, my grandmother taught me this, my mother taught me this, and and she could make these people real versus being an orphan and not knowing anything and having to discover trial by fire.
Yeah.
No, we're not doing that. So.
Well, and that way it keeps the family line through the books very clear, I think, that way.
Exactly.
While still being very mysterious in its own way.
And it just feels very much to me true to the Black American community and its emphasis on family and legacy and what is passed down. Like, we can't just erase these things. In order for this book to feel like it really is a slice from that community. These themes have to be reckoned with. This has to be a texture woven through the narrative. Like, there's no way to do it. It would not be true to us.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Bethany, let me pass it on to you.
Yeah. So of course, doing a Little Women remix, that you're going to have an intact, or at least a somewhat intact, family of sisters and the mother. As with Dhonielle, of course, we are always reckoning with the either the misrepresentation of Black Americans. We never get, as Black Americans who have been maligned and disrespected and dehumanized, we don't get to come to a blank slate and say, like, I'm just going to do whatever, because whatever I do is either participating in this dehumanization or is reckoning with and challenging it. So I knew that I was going to have a March family and they were going to be intact, and that the father was going to be away, and that the father was going to be in love with his family. Really, all I had to do was base it on my own family, with sisters and an adoring father. But I also knew that I wanted to reckon with the historicity and the actual historical research that I have done, and what is true of the United States, and why the original is such fantastical fiction, and why most of, if not all of, the canon is completely fantastical, because I had to deal with the fact that part of the campaign of anti-Blackness has been to intentionally destroy the Black family unit. And so Amy is not born into the March family. She is adopted into the March family because of such a situation. It comes up at different times in the story that the incentivization of Black men leaving the family unit so that the union would actually pay them their wages, versus saying, well, we would have paid you, but we're giving rations to these women and children, and therefore that's really how we're paying you. And so instead of being tied into another very clear enslavement, they were incentivized to leave.
Mhm.
And you see this all through American history, this ongoing campaign against the Black American family unit. You see it, following that with lynching. You see it following that with enslavement or re-enslavement in the prison industrial complex. So these are not characteristics of Black American families. This is an ongoing campaign. This is an ongoing assault. And so in my story, we are tethered to and we are grounded in a Black American family. We are seeing the historical context, and we're seeing what the United States is doing and is capable of, but we're also seeing the weight of having an intact family and how much more powerful it is for this March family because of what the United States has done. So the gentility with which these women engage each other, with which the mother treats the daughters, with which the father speaks of the daughters when he writes them letters, is all based on the fact that they are very aware of the miracle, the miraculous nature of having a family, of having a mostly biological family, not to put that on a pedestal above adoptive or found family, but simply because this was something that was intentionally being attacked on a daily basis. This is miraculous. They are not going to do certain things to each other. They are not going to talk to each other a certain way. This is a Black American family in 1863 who have weathered enslavement and are still together. It allowed me to, because when people look at my family a lot of times, and Dhonielle knows, like, if you see me and my son, we are
Together.
we are one. We are one.
Here.
And so, and I grew up like this. I grew up with a very, very affectionate family. I still have a very, very affectionate father who just trolled me from across the country this past weekend when I was at a roller skating rink in Schenectady, New York, and he called it from California and had them announce something over the PA system to me. So I really only had to base it on my actual family. But when Black Americans have this sort of beautiful, amazing familial experience, it is not lost on us that this was attempted to be destroyed. This is something that they have tried for centuries to wrench away from us. And so you can lean into the gentility, and you can lean into the affection and just the passionate devotion that they have for each other, and know that these characters understand the weight, the gravity of having a family in a way that the original family did not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, that completely comes off the page as someone who's just recently finished it. It really, like, I went and called my grandma after I finished the book because I was like, this is so, it made me so, like, it projected all of those feelings of, like, the value of that. Mm-hmm. Even obviously my very different experience of family, I was like, wow, let me go savor real quick.
Right.
Yeah. Your book really makes you feel the bonds of family and how it was survival and it was love. It was everything in those bonds.
I can't wait.
Well, you're up, Nafiza. Tell us about the family in Wild Ones.
Okay, so the Wild Ones, contrary to moving in the opposite direction of Dhonielle and Bethany's books, when you meet Paheli, her relationship with her mother is obviously over, and her sense of self is completely shattered. So she meets this woman who's magical. Her name is Eulalie, and she's in New Orleans. Anyway, it is through Eulalie's help that Paheli gets her sense of self back. She heals, and then she is hesitant to call her a mother, even though she assumes that role in her life because she has trauma, obviously. And then as Paheli collects her wild ones as her girls, they become a family. And though the wild ones aren't a forever family because the girls come and go, they heal the trauma and they return to their real lives. every time she meets a girl, she welcomes her into this sisterhood. So it is the sisterhood that I created, a found family where they can be as messy, as loud, and as wild as sisterhoods are. You get to show them all your not so savory sides, because you're not going to be judged. So I walked towards that, and that too, I, like Bethany, I took from my own life, from growing up with a whole tribe of sisters. So yeah, there's a lot of found family in my book, and not as much real family. I feel like as an immigrant, you come and when I came to Canada, I met other people who were sort of in the same limbo state, liminal spaces, and then you connect. Even though you might not come from the same place, you have the same experiences, you have the same questions. So I wanted to put that into the wild ones. They have the same experiences, so they know each other's pain, so they understand each other's unspoken moments. So that's what I put into the book. Yeah.
Well, and in many ways, I feel like Paheli becomes something of a mother figure to some of the girls as well.
I mean, she would never admit it, but yes.
No, absolutely. Very, very reticent. Very reticent mother figure. Okay, I wanted to ask one more thing about the content of the books before I get into some craft questions. And that's that each of these books has an element of romance to it that's different levels of central to the plot. But that, there's many forms of love in these books: love for your sisters, love for your family, love for your friends. But there's also romantic love in all of these books. And so I want to talk about, I want to hear about the way that you approached intertwining those things and how you thought about including those romantic storylines to fit with the larger things that you were doing in your books.
So because I had the task of intertwining two families that you meet in the first book, I had to have this tumultuous relationship. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? I love reading romance. I love trying to write it. I don't know how good I am. I try my best. Lots of people like, I hate it until, she loves it. That's like a thinly veiled autobiography of me and romance. So I had to make the two branches of the family come together, and it's 1928, it's Jim Crow South, and one branch of the family is white, and now one branch of the family is Black because of the history and who intermarried. And yes, so I did so much research. I went to New Orleans. I went to the Historical Society. I went to the archives. I read newspapers. I looked at where all of the different lynchings were in the city and around the city. I looked at all of the different laws and rules, thinking about if a Black woman actually fell in love with a white man in the 1920s New Orleans, what would that look like? And how scary would it be? And what would she see in the newspaper? What would make her not want to do it? What would keep her from connecting? And thinking about all of that history. And I thought about, so my great-grandmother, who I grew up around, she lived until she was 108. She married a white man in the same time period, and they took her children, my grandfather, out of her house and put them in a different house. And that's why I have the last name Clayton, because of that removal, because it was illegal for Black people and white people to marry or to be together. And so that I'm using that context to build this really faded and sort of doomed relationship, and to make sure it felt real, that her preoccupations, her fears, his eagerness to just like go for it, his blind spots, I wanted them to feel so real as I was building this love story that is integral to the other two books in the series. So, I also had that, right? Jen Cervantes is behind me, and her book is resting on my love story. So I had a lot of pressure, but it was fun to build. It was scary to build. It felt sad to build, thinking about maybe what my grandmother would have gone through, and and what my grandfather did go through, having his parents removed from his home as a young child, and try to channel all of that into this like really explosive love story. So it was hard to write,
Mhm.
honestly, because I knew it was going to have to be bittersweet.
Yeah. And it is both of those things in strong and equal measures. For
Right.
sure.
You're like, oh no, you see it and you're like, oh, this isn't going to end well, but let's enjoy the ride for now. But oh no.
Yeah, and like you say, Dhonielle, especially for those of us for whom this is part of our actual history, this is part of our familial history, especially if at the time that person wasn't at least Irish or Scottish, in which case they weren't, they weren't always quite white yet, and you could get away with it legally. Maybe
Yeah.
not socially, but you could get away with it legally. These are things that are very, I'm sure nobody was aware of the kind of personal history and the kind of thought process and how to make this real, and why every love story can't just be, the third act reversal based on a misunderstanding. And it's like, no, sometimes it's real. Sometimes it's heavier than that.
Exactly. Yeah. And people probably, they're so mad. They're like, oh my God, why didn't you like let them run away and do all that? I'm like, because that's actually not real.
Because my life.
Black bodies. Like,
Because my life. I'm like, if you're mad, be mad at the United States, okay?
Exactly.
Because this actually was done to our families.
Right. Get off my Goodreads.
Right. You're not mad at the content of this book. You're mad at history.
Exactly.
Go leave your Goodreads review on a history textbook.
Exactly. Show them. Right to the White House. Let them know.
Somebody. Talk to somebody, but not me. So for so many beginnings, I have romance, but I always want to make sure that people don't misunderstand another aspect of it as well. So if we're talking about romance, I would talk about Meg, because Meg is the one who wants a romance and again, all of these desires take on a completely different weight when you are newly emancipated, when you have been owned as property, when you have been told that you are not a person. All of these things that, it's why feminism leaves non-white women behind so often, because if you make up what it is to be strong, what it is to be powerful, what it is to be, to be a feminist based on a white American woman's experience and her desires and her hopes and dreams, and then you decide that certain things are just facile and very unsophisticated, that's completely ridiculous. That's completely offensive, because for somebody who was just property to say, I want to be a wife in a country that didn't allow us to legally marry, I want to be a mother in a country that stole our children, that is a very different kind of desire. Mm-hmm. That is a much more complex and revolutionary hope for Meg to have in so many beginnings than it might have been in Little Women. So she absolutely has the romantic desires in the family. I don't know what I can say actually about a couple of things. But pretty much immediately in the story, there's a man who has come to the Free People colony, and he's a northern freeborn Black man, and he has come down with General Wild to start the African Brigade, which is when they started allowing Black American men to fight in the Civil War on the side of the Union. And the whole sort of morning leading up to this, different people in the family have met and seen this man, and everybody had the same thought, which is we got to introduce this Joseph Williams to Meg. Like we have to. And so he ends up coming to the family home, and they make him a somewhat embarrassing supper of shadfish, which is not company fish, as I say. But and obviously things are much more complicated. They're not straightforward for Meg, of course. And it's not like it's a reveal, so I guess I shouldn't treat it like it's a spoiler. But Joe is very clearly and intentionally on the asexual aromantic spectrum. And as I always thought she was when I was growing up. I mean, when I related to Joe in the 1994 movie, and the reason that I hate the end of that movie so much was because I thought, oh, this is a character who doesn't sort of see a hierarchy of love, and she values her familial love and her sibling love as highly as other characters value a romantic type of love. And that's what I thought. And so I was like, oh, I get this person. And then suddenly here comes this old man professor who tells her what to write and what's authentic for her to write. And she suddenly like does it anyway. That's a whole other thing. So this connection with Lori, I wanted to give them basically the queer platonic relationship that made the most sense to me. Now, there's not language for this in the book, and this is a part of the historical research, and there's a reason that I have a discussion guide, which I would really encourage people to seek out, because you will think, oh, you didn't put it on the page. I absolutely put it on the page. There's no way you can miss that Joe is asexual. There's no way that you can miss it. I'm sorry. But I also didn't want to take my modern understanding of labels and apply it in a time when language was being held hostage for the purpose of erasing people. There is a reason that Joe doesn't have language for the way that she feels, in the very, very different way that she experiences love and thinks of love. And it's not just in the romantic side of the story. Beth has a disease, which is very obviously a sickle trait disorder, which I have as well. And there's no language for it because it doesn't affect white Americans. And there's something about withholding language that is dehumanizing, that is intentional. And I did not want to apply language that I know today that they would not have had access to. But what I want to demonstrate is withholding language does not change reality, first of all. And I don't have to make up a term to say that this exists, because of course it does. I live with sickle trait disorder. I know it exists. It doesn't matter if I was told I was a liar as a teenager. I knew what was going on in my body. I knew that something was wrong. I know that I look perfectly able-bodied, and I know that I can't walk without thinking about it like the average person. If somebody's like, let's just go for a walk, and it's like, well, for how long? I'm like, well, you can't just walk. You don't like walk for an undetermined a period of time, and then people really can do that, right? Okay, well, if you have a sickle trait disorder and you don't get enough oxygen in your body, you might not be able to do that. And somebody telling you it's a lie doesn't make it a lie. So I wanted to keep that assault intact. I wanted to keep that withholding of language intact because it's true, because it's real. And I also wanted to delegitimize the assault itself by making it very clear. You can see who these people are and what these people are dealing with, regardless of whether somebody deigns to give it a title, to give it a label, and to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn. I had a lot of fun writing the romance in The Wild Ones because one of the characters, Tarana, is completely in love with Paheli, who does everything but admit her interest in him. And this is for several reasons. First of all, she is scared to make herself as vulnerable to someone else again. And another thing, as I said, her sense of self had been so shattered in the beginning by what happened to her that she has consciously moved away from romantic love. And thirdly, Tarana is so good. He is that soft boy who cries at movies or, when he's looking at a puppy, pictures of puppies. So he is good. And she has done things in her very long life that she feels has somehow tainted her and will taint him should she go ahead and be with him. So when you read the portions where he's trying to flirt with her and she's like staring blankly at him like, what are you doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? I hope that readers are like, at least, feel empathetic to her because her feelings are so awkward when he kisses her on the cheek and she's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And he's like, sorry. And she's like, no, you don't have to be sorry. And not like it, but So, and then there's only one kiss, not a spoiler. There's only one kiss in the book, but I felt like I wanted to show them growing closer together through their conversations and the little touches, which may seem like nothing to other people, but to those who have gone who have been through trauma, whose sense of selves have been assaulted so badly, they will know that just reaching out and holding someone's hand is such a big step. You are consciously opening yourself to pain once more. So them just holding hands or sitting side by side is such a big deal. And I wanted to convey that with the way their relationship comes out. And even at the end, I didn't want to tie it all up very neatly and say so they lived happily ever after, because these girls know that there is no such thing as happily ever after. It's just one day at a time, and that's what they want to convey their with the romance. And it's the love in the book is not just the love for each other, for sisterhoods. The book is ultimately about falling in love with yourself and realizing that you are worth it, that you should do anything you can to win yourself, because you only have yourself to take you through life till the very end. So whatever happens to you, you put yourself together again, you walk and you treat yourself nicely, because you are your own hero. Yeah.
And I really did those like little moments that really jump off of the page. And I sometimes, I love reading romances and I don't mind a whirlwind romance at all. But I really do feel like those little tiny moments were so well emphasized in your book. And it really made me just like edge of my seat for Paheli to like acknowledge in any way what was happening. It was really, really wonderful to read. And okay, so I want to do a few questions about craft, because all of your books are very beautifully crafted, and I've just realized how much time we've spent talking about the content of them, but I have to hear about the craft. So first of all, you've both touched, Bethany and Dhonielle, a little bit on the research that you did, and both of your books are historical settings and have sort of a backbone of a historical time and place. But Nafiza, there's a lot of different places in your book as well, because I don't know if you mentioned this in the summary you gave, but the Between has doors that open into different places in the world. And so the girls are traveling to all of these different amazing places and eating all of this incredible food. I don't know if I've ever been more hungry than while reading your book, because they're always eating just incredible food. So I'm sure that you had to do a lot of research as well in terms of the places that all of the girls go to and that. So I would love to just hear a little bit about the process of your research and how you melded that into the cohesive fiction that you made.
Okay, so as I said, the book was inspired by Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, and Neverland for them is an island, and Neverland for Paheli and her wild ones is the entire world. So they go to 13 different cities in the book. So every chapter is basically a new city, and I hated myself while writing, because I was like, why did you do this to yourself? Because there was just so much research. My editor actually thought that I had traveled to all of these countries, and I was like, I wish. I had only been to Lautoka, Fiji, which is which is where I grew up, which is in the first chapter. So for research, I would start off by reading the history of the city that I'm basing the chapter on. And once I read the history, then I would start looking for events that specially made the city what it is, where there were wars or what. And then I would Google map it, and I would virtually walk the streets for like hours just to see, like, get a sense of the place, and then see if there were some colors that popped. There's this chapter set in the Istanbul, where they go to the Jewish quarter, and I actually walked those cities and I looked at the houses, and I was like, I'm going to base the chapter over here. So I actually observed virtual observations, but still. Then I watched documentaries on YouTube. There were these travelers of whom I'm very jealous of, who went and did walking documentaries, and they would comment on the smells and the sights and the sounds they heard. So it was very widely encompass my my research. So yeah, I did a lot of everything except going to the place. The only thing I couldn't figure out was how the city would smell at certain points. And I would ask people, and they would be like, "Why would you want to know what the city smells?" I was like, professional curiosity. I want to know what a city smells like. For example, Chef Chauvin, I had never even heard of the city until I was researching Marrakech. And then there was like a blue city to the north. And I'm like, wow, it's such an amazingly beautiful place. The city is blue. And someone, like, if you look it up on YouTube, somebody's always walking around just doing these really surreal walkthroughs of the city, which is full of stairs and corners and beautiful architecture. So yeah, if you ever want a place to visit, go to Chef Chauvin. I know.
Well, hopefully we will all get to visit all the beautiful places in your book someday when we are free of the clutches of this pandemic in a hypothetical future.
Fingers crossed.
Well, let's bump it over to Bethany to talk a little bit about the research for yours.
I always say that when I'm writing, if you're writing from a non-dominant narrative or perspective, you do more world building than I think white authors know even exists. Because, as I said, if I read the original Little Women, to me, it's fantastical. And I know it's fantastical even from a white American standpoint, but you're taught this sort of grandiose or self-aggrandizing type of perspective of the world that you could honestly believe that during the Civil War, it could just be like a backdrop and your biggest concern are limes and you live in this big estate, even though you're a totally impoverished family. And like, so it's just a complete fantastical. I say that that marginalized authors on a craft level are we are the best authors on a craft level because we have to show you even the real actual world that you live in. We have to build it up for you a pixel at a time, because your world experience allows you to completely ignore it, and to debate things that are observable fact. So I always say historical fiction for me is the same level of craft work as a contemporary fantasy, as science fiction, honestly, because even though this is readily available information, it's intentionally not taught, it's intentionally buried, it's intentionally disputed despite records. So it's almost impossible to tell somebody somebody who doesn't have to give an account for their existence, somebody who's not accustomed to having to just constantly give a testimony on threat of otherwise being ignored, being overlooked, being oppressed, being whatever, being denied. On threat of that, having to constantly sort of keep an actual record, a real record of reality, because the society that you live in is so averse to it. It would be difficult to tell that person, how do you even go from all of this research and all of this truth to it being on the page? Because a part of it has to be that you are deprogrammed to the point that you know what reality really is, and you know how to not just create a new fiction, just turn it back into the mythology that you've been taught. So these answers there's a whimsical and sort of divine element to them, because I go from history and I go from texture, I go from geological studies of this island and the Outer Banks and what would have been there, down to like mushrooms and how would somebody who's because Beth is a seamstress, how would somebody who's a seamstress dye their materials and that sort of thing, and just how to bring all of the minutia into everyday life, how to live in it, so that it's not just random facts that I'm like, here's all the evidence, all of the research that I did, but making it a part of a life and making it a part of a daily activity, a day-to-day activity. It's not something that we can just say. It's going to sound a lot easier than it is. Let me put it that way. It's always going to sound a lot simpler than it is. There's an alchemy that takes place, and there's a self-awareness that has to be present in order to really do world building. If you have a ton of blind spots, you're not really ever going to be able to fully compose. a world, because you're not going to think of all the things that actually make up a world. So I find these questions really interesting, because I feel like for the people who need to know, I have no idea how to explain to you how you actually do world building. It starts with knowing what the truth is, honestly. It starts with knowing what the real world is like, what the real world looks like, what the real world is composed of, all of the different elements, all the different facets and sides, so that you know how to build one that perhaps is not but something that replicates the complexity and the fullness of the world that we live in. So I always say you start with the truth, or at least an understanding of the truth, whether you're doing historical fiction, contemporary fantasy, science fiction, whatever. And with this, it was there was just so much of it that lent itself to story. Like, more story kept coming out because of the research. I didn't know that, for example, Amy was going to be a dancer until I gave her these shoes. I was just looking up what is something that she wouldn't have owned on her own, that she might have confiscated from an abandoned big house, and would have been attractive enough for this 14-year-old girl to take, and also been something that completely gave her sort of a new ability or new perspective. And they're just shoes, but if you've never worn intact shoes before that fit, that are well maintained and well taken care of, how might you feel? And that for her became just like this exuberant expressiveness that leads sort of to showcasing this innate talent that she had. But I always want to say there's just some level of mysticism and alchemy to what we do when you do it well. And like I said, it starts with being able to observe and acknowledge the real world.
Yeah.
They took all the best answers. I mean, I don't really add to that. I just did a whole bunch.
I kind of just blabbed, so you're fine.
I did a bunch of research, and I went to the city and I walked the streets of where my character would have walked, and I looked at maps of the city and stressed out the librarians at the historical library. They were like, "Wait, what are you doing?" They're like, "Wait, what? There's magic? What?" And I was like, "Look, I'm sorry. I just need to know what this house be on this street at this corner, and like where things were." And like they took out the maps and they humored me. And I tried to just immerse myself in the current city to see what was lost, and then try to go back and see, you know what I mean, what was made of it, because New Orleans is a city with a very peculiar type of history, and a very particular Black community. And I wanted to get that right. I mean, I'm not from 1928, so I can only do so much, but wanting to make sure that the flavor of the city was correct, and that I was giving dignity to it, because it's such an interesting place. And the whole reason why I got the idea to fix Disney's outline and change things was I'd gone to New Orleans on a vacation, and I just signed up for the project, and I talked to this cab driver, because I'm a chatty Cathy when I get into a cab. And he's born and raised, generations of people coming to New Orleans. And I said, because I was wrestling with Disney, and I was like, why would someone leave Harlem to come to New Orleans in the 1920s? And he said, like, if you heard the New Orleans accent, he said, "Baby, people come to New Orleans to disappear." And that's how we said it. And I was like, boom, there's a story. Got it. And like, that's how the story began.
Oh, that's so good.
And so because he had been in the city for 3 or 4 generations, he was able to give me that sort of nugget of like, this is why she would come. And then I was like, great, I've got the story. And then I unraveled it from there.
You got like the best accidental research ever. That was wow.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we're running short on time, so I'm going to try to get an audience question in here. But before we do that, I am going to remind everybody that you can buy these delightful books that we've been talking about. They're all wonderful. You will feel so much. You will learn so much. You will experience so much. You will become very hungry. And you can purchase them all through our wonderful independent bookseller, Red Balloon, at the green button on your screen. It is very nice and easy. You can get them shipped or pick them up. It is up to you. However, I'm going to get us an audience question, and there's somebody who has asked, were these books coming together during the pandemic to some extent, and how did that experience of writing them and creating these books, how was it flavored by the experience of writing in the pandemic and for the last couple of years?
I don't know if I can say that it was flavored by the pandemic that they're probably talking about, but there have been multiple ongoing pandemics, especially if you are Black American. And so one of the pandemics has, of course, been the ongoing campaign for Black lives. And what was writing one of the gentlest stories I've ever written, as So Many Beginnings is, but also writing a story that is set in 1863 and where the society was and what arguments the society was making for not valuing Black lives. It was extremely, I don't know the word. It's not just disheartening. It's not just depressing. It's not just enraging. I'm not sure what the single word would be that encapsulates it. But when you're writing a story based in 1863, it's not supposed to be current.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's not supposed to be contemporary fiction. So that was a very jarring experience, because while I could sink into these particular characters and their relationships, they are also, like every other marginalized person, constantly aware of the social context, the greater national context. And it absolutely impedes on their life and impacts their daily lives. So it was a constant back and forth between this just amazing gentleness and this violence, this ongoing violence. And it was just too not. When I signed for this book, I signed the past is present. And I mean that so literally. And it's why I don't have any patience for anyone who pretends that certain things are up for debate, that there is discussion to be had, that I am supposed to give you evidence of things that you've been doing for centuries, and how many laws are in place to make it, yes, somewhat invisible, but the outcome is such that you can look just at the result and see exactly what the motive is and why certain things are being done. So if anything, it made me more resolute in the fact that I will not give certain people any additional oxygen or energy ever again. It's completely unacceptable. Certain people just don't exist to me anymore, because it's not difficult. It's not rocket science. It's not hard. It's very observable. And that was a very jarring and upsetting experience. But I mean, I wrote multiple books during the pandemic. I couldn't tell you what those experiences were like. I don't remember. And
Yeah. Pandemic brain.
I've just been working. How they got done, I don't know. When did I write them? I'm not sure. I know I have another book coming out in February, so I must have written it.
Right. Like it happened. It happened.
It happened. I don't know when.
A first draft, either a first or a second draft right before the pandemic, in the fall of 2019. And then I was researching in New Orleans at the end of Mardi Gras. And then the pandemic, New York shut down like a week later. Like I literally flew back to New York early because everyone was saying the city's going to shut down. The city's going to shut down. The city's going to shut down. And I'm like ordering stuff to make sure I'm set, and literally that's what happened. And then, I lost a lot of editors and stuff too. Sorry, I have a person outside my door who always buzzes it. So excuse me, I'm just going to mute. Nafiza, you talk.
You are totally fine.
The Wild Ones was written in 2018, so it wasn't affected by the pandemic at all. It was affected by the Me Too movement. So I was just so angry at the way women were constantly being treated. And so I tell people that it's fueled by anger. It's fueled by my refusal to be a statistic. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was affected by the pandemic. I don't know if I would have written the book during the pandemic because it was so difficult to write because of its heavy themes. I probably wouldn't have done myself. I wouldn't have done that to myself because life is already hard. So I wouldn't actually, escape into a fictional world that is just as difficult. So while it wasn't affected by the pandemic, the disease, it was affected by the way women are constantly being treated. I mean, people want to pretend that feminism, certain people want to pretend that feminism isn't an issue anymore. But those who know, especially women of color, we know that sexism and discrimination because of our gender and of our race is a constant thing, and intersectional feminism is what this book addresses. And I wanted to put that across because many of the books that come out have feminism as a subtle theme. It's in the subtext, and I was like, no more subtext. I want it to be right there, explicitly in the prose, in the language. So yeah, that's my answer.
Subtext is for cowards anyway.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I've loved the text and subtext of all of your books. It has been absolutely wonderful to read all of them. I will remind everybody one more time that you can purchase these books and you can enjoy them on your own time as you choose. And I want to also remind you, we have other great festival events coming up. We'll put a link in the chat for you to check them out. And I want to thank our media sponsors, who are Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, Minnesota Public Radio, the Star Tribune, and Twin Cities Public Television, as well as, again, the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council and Minnesota State Arts Board for their support. But thank you most of all to everybody who tuned in, to these lovely authors for being with us and making our Saturday morning a little bit more insightful and exciting. And I hope you will go get all the insight and excitement from these books. Thank you for joining us so much, and have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next time.
Bye.